So tell us about your life growing up in Mississippi.
I was born in Starkville, Mississippi, number 5 out of 9 children, 4 brothers, 4 sisters. Starkville is a university town, very small town in northeast Mississippi. Growing up there was kind of different than what you might think of Mississippi in the 40s and the 50s, where there were people picking cotton, even though we did raise some cotton, but mostly grain for our cows in the hills. The thing that was so different, though, I believe, is that being a university town, the people who we grew up around were primarily educated people, and they were from all over the country. So we had a chance, I think, we had opportunities to see more and experience more than we would have had we been born or living in a different part of the state, vis-a-vis the Delta. But I grew up really wanting to be an entrepreneur, I believe, because at a very early age, I would walk around to the homes of faculty members of Mississippi State selling flower seeds. So I had personal knowledge of most of the faculty members who lived on the campus there at the university. So that was a bit of exposure there for me. Even though I was not a part of it, I could see it and I could witness what was going on there.
So growing up around Mississippi State, you're right there, as you say, across the street from it, but when it was time for you to go to college, you weren't able to. So maybe you can talk about the situation with Mississippi State and where you ended up going. What was your educational path?
I graduated from high school in 1960, and you might remember that that was prior to James Meredith entering the University of Mississippi, where he was escorted onto the campus by federal troops. In 1960, nothing like that had happened, so I went to the school that was available to me, Mississippi Valley, in the Mississippi Delta. I graduated there in 1964, and I would then leave Mississippi Valley and move to Toledo, Ohio, where I started work for the state of Ohio as an employment counselor for the Ohio State Employment Service. And I held that job until I was drafted to the military.
From Toledo, then you're going to Vietnam, you're back from Vietnam, so what happens after that that gets you to the auto world?
Well, kind of a long story there too. While in Toledo, I had always wanted to be a part of the automobile industry, but I visited Detroit, where I also had relatives, and to make applications for the 3 car companies, and none of them were that interested in employing me at the time. So finally I met this guy in HR at Chrysler Corporation named Matt Ingham. So he said, why don't you go and you know, get a little more age on you, get a little more experience, and let's see what happened with the draft, and come back to see me. And when I returned from the military, I went back to see Matt. He was still there. And at that time, I was employed at Chrysler as a management trainee. They had a great program at Chrysler. I was a trainee in personnel. There were 5 of us. There were 4 white students and myself. That were none in engineering. I believe in the corporation there was probably not more than 5 black executives at the whole corporate headquarters at the time. Among those black executives that I met at Chrysler Corporation, actually 5 of them, 4 African Americans and 1 Armenian, started a Schlitz beer distributorship here in Detroit. And I had wanted to become a part of their company, but of course they didn't need a new partner at that point. So at one point, probably the most senior black executive at Chrysler at the time, Lowell Perry, suggested that I should look into getting a truck, and so that I could haul their beer from Milwaukee, where it was brewed, back here to Detroit, where they were distributing it. And fortunately, before rushing out to buy this truck, I went to see what it would take to get into the trucking business. I had a very, very supportive partner, my uncle, who I had not mentioned, my uncle Calvin Outlaw, who grew up also next door to where I grew up in Mississippi. He was my dad's younger brother, but he was more like a brother to me than an uncle. But he had, after the Korean War was over, he came here to Detroit and worked at Hertz Truck Rental, where they rented fleets of trucks to big companies. And his job was to maintain those trucking fleets. And that gave him all the knowledge that he needed as to what it would take, what type of a truck, first of all, it would take to do this job, and how to maintain the trucks, and even how to train and qualify drivers to drive the trucks. He had a thorough knowledge of that. And the two of us were living, he purchased a house on the west side of Detroit on Sturtevant, and the two of us lived there. And we were two bachelors, so we didn't need a dining room. So I converted the dining room table into my office, and the garage, it had a two-car garage. He converted that into his shop where he put his tools to work on the truck. So we did that for a few years to kind of keep things going. And so his ability to do the part of keeping the fleet going and knowing what types of trucks to use and to train drivers, and my ability to get out there and knock on doors to get things done, it was the right combination. And that was when I learned about the Interstate Commerce Commission regulating trucking, and that if you wanted to apply, you had to have an attorney, of course, who was a specialist in that area, because your application would be published in the Federal Register. And everybody who's in the trucking business had lawyers who would read the Federal Register and would immediately oppose your application, merely because they had a right to do that. When regulation came in, people who were licensed were protected, and they could protest new people coming in. So my application went to the ICC in 1971, and what they would do is they would issue an emergency temporary permit. They would not give you the authority right away. The only thing about the temp is that it would be only for a 90-day duration. But at the end of that 90 days, you could reapply. So I did. I applied, got the 90 days. At the end of each 90 days, I would reapply. But then I could only haul their beer from Milwaukee to Detroit. I then decided that, I needed to get something to move westward toward Milwaukee, because I was bringing the beer eastward back this way. So that is when I got the idea of the automobile industry. There was a company that all of you guys are too young to remember called American Motors, who used to make the Nash Rambler and the Gremlin and those vehicles. They were assembling that vehicle in Kenosha, Wisconsin, which is really Milwaukee. But they were receiving automobile parts to build those vehicles from this area in Michigan. So I went to American Motors, asked them if I could move automobile parts for them from Detroit to Kenosha, Wisconsin, which would give me a balanced move. So when I did that, that is what got the attention of the whole industry. When I applied just for the beer, there were only a handful of protesters. But when automobile parts became a part of my application, then trucking companies all the way from Minnesota to Georgia protested when they saw that in the Federal Register. No one wanted me in that part of the business. So I knew then that I would need, more vigorous support. The traffic manager at American Motors was very straightforward and honest with me. He said, "John, look, sure, I'll support your application and I'll let you move my parts, but I'm a bit reluctant to support you right now because I'm standing alone. I'm the smaller of all of them, and I don't want to be, isolated. Say, if you go back and if you can get GM, Ford, Chrysler, or someone to support your application, that would make it better." So then that is when I went to Ford, and Ford got on board right away. But I did finally get all the GM support. I came back, put my application together, and got it to Washington. And of course, that was when the sky fell. That's when everybody came in and started protesting. So at that point, the Interstate Commerce Commission finally set up a hearing. They set it up in Chicago, Illinois. I wasn't hauling beer there, no automobile parts going there, but that was a way for the ICC to discourage my entering the business. I had the task of convincing 5 General Motors executives, 2 Ford executives, and 2 Schlitz executives to travel to Chicago to testify for me in a 3-day hearing. They all showed up. All 5 GM execs, all of the Ford execs, and the Schlitz guys all showed up at the hearing, a 3-day hearing. And this is where the administrative law judge recommended a grant of the authority for OJ Transport Company. Well, that was when my real trouble started. Typically, what was supposed to have happened is that the application is made, protesters come in, you make your case, ICC make a ruling. And it all handled administratively in that way. But because of my case, I guess at that time being so unique, it involved all 3 branches of government. After I had exhausted all of my remedies within the ICC, then I went to the judiciary, wound up in the court systems, all the way to the United States Supreme Court. During that time, I was driving to Washington to visit with legislators. One senator went, I think, an extra long way in giving me support, and that was Senator Robert Griffin from the state of Michigan. He worked with me throughout. But after the, of course, that's the legislative part. So I had been through the judiciary and entered the legislative part, and then would come the executive part, because after the Supreme Court remanded my case back, then I made several visits to the White House, and I visited with staff of the president, and ultimately the president invited me to Washington once the transportation bill was signed and enacted to actually witness his signing, which was probably a high point. Just for a guy with a handful of trucks wanting to get into a business that had been around for ages, it took all 3 branches of the federal government to get me there.
July 1st, 1980, President Carter signed the Motor Carrier Act. Mm-hmm. And to go back to that, so what did that feel like? Personal satisfaction moment for you, and then talk about what it meant for your business, what you had fought for all this time. What did it mean now that you had signed this act and you had a little more leeway? What did that mean for your business?
Well, as you know, I had already been operating this was in 1980, I had been operating for about 7, 8 years on a temporary permit. So we were pretty much well along at that, but it was was a high point for me to be invited to the White House and to be, again, given credit for a lot of things that maybe I didn't deserve the credit for, but nonetheless, it felt good. I had kind of opened that door, and I was helping other people get in. African Americans and women, they would go, when they approached the car companies, they'd be kind of guided toward trucking. So I looked around one day and I said, there's got to be some other opportunities here. So I went to the car companies, Ford first, and asked, what percentage of your total transportation dollars is spent in trucking? They said, about 15%. So then I decided, I think I'm going to go and try to expand, but I'm going to try it in the 85%. So transportation at that time, trucking was just a part, but then you got rail, you got warehousing, you got water, you got freight forwarding, all kinds of components that make up that 85%. So that is how I started to grow my business and get into other areas. I got into warehousing, I got into parts sequencing, sub-assemblies, all of that comes under the supply chain. And that is how we were able to grow and still be able to kind of help others who were trying to get in.
Here, talk about what's the atmosphere of family and culture around your business. I mean, it started with family, essentially, OJ, and all the way up to where you are now.
Yeah. My uncle's name was Calvin Outlaw, and of course my name, John James. That's how I came up with the OJ for the name of the initial trucking company. And then, of course, as we did more things, we renamed it to the OJ Group. And after my uncle passed, we changed it to James Group International because we've gotten into international business. We have 3 children, John, Lord, and Carrie. Now, they all went to undergrad school out of state, and kind of unusual, but each of them wound up coming back home, and each of them wound up getting involved in the business. I didn't encourage any of that. Of course, not that I discourage it, but they have come in and they've taken this company to a whole new level. I believe when I was managing this, I was managing probably about maybe 400,000 square feet of floor space. And I believe that my 2 sons right now are close to 2 million square feet of floor space. I think they were, of course, they're raised by their mother, so that's where they got their intelligence. And I guess they must have gotten their perseverance from their dad. So they're all doing extremely well, and I'm extremely pleased.
What advice would you offer someone aspiring to move into not logistics, but entrepreneurship as a business? Sounds like there's some ethics that you learned way back in Mississippi that you carry through today.
For someone wanting to enter business these days, first of all, it has to be something that you want to do. You need to come up with a product or a service where there's a need, and I think that that's the key ingredient that I would add to someone wanting to get into business is to have all those traits, the traits of desire, perseverance, and but also have a product or service that someone needs, or that someone would be willing to purchase from you.
You have been philanthropically connected here, so you're not just in business, but you're in community, and you've supported your community, and you've been honored and recognized over the years, many awards. So is there anything that sticks out to you as far as special recognition, any special achievement that you would want to look back on as far as that goes? I don't know if you had to pick out just one or if something comes right to mind.
No, that's just one, but I think I've already tipped my hat on that. Okay. The one that's most rewarding to me was not a trophy, it was not a plaque. It was seeing my 3 children come in here and take this business and take it with a degree of success that they have to where it is now. That's the best prize, the best gift that I could ever have, and I'm extremely happy about it. And that's when you heard me say that I'm the most blessed man on the face of the earth. I meant it. You know, that my children, their mother, the business, the help from all of these suppliers, from the people in government who helped us. I mean, none of this stuff should have taken place, but it did, and I needed the help, and I got it. So we're here.